Howdy, listeners and viewers. On the right side radio, Reid Lance Rosenthal and the Cowboys Take. If you happen to be watching me, watching my lips move. So this is our fourth, I believe, video broadcast. Last week, we kind of did it in conjunction with our AM radio broadcast. A lot of you wanted to see that, and a lot of you were really pleased with it. Keep those comments coming. We love it. We love it. As you can see, my backdrop here, those of you who are on video, has kind of changed a little bit. Poor Harry, my co-producer, my co-anchor, he's moved from one log to another. He is now out of the picture, so to speak. No pun intended. And this week, we're going to be bringing you the third installment and the last, although I'm sure we'll be revisiting this insidious topic as time goes on and we get closer to the election, of treason in general, and particularly here in the United States, and particularly in the here and now. And I'm going to be bringing you some anecdotes about treason over the last, few years and hundreds of years in the United States and elsewhere to kind of tie in what we've discussed in the two previous shows. What is treason? And how do you commit treason, and what are the penalties? And what do the other countries on the planet, how do they handle treason? Because we are at the point in this republic, folks, where we are a sinking ship. The rats have gnawed and the torpedoes have bored holes below the waterline in our hull. Aided and abetted and sometimes directly accomplished by people who are traitors, treasonous. We're going to be talking about some of them and what's happened just in the last week. I mean, this is a daily occurrence now, or a daily revelation. We're going to be talking about Garland up there, testifying, squirming in his seat, dodging and weaving this last week in Congress. And Fauci, tricky, fraudulent Tony Fauci, and the people that he killed and maimed, and the lies that he knew, it's now coming out. He knew he was telling you as he was looking you in the camera and gathering tens upon tens of millions of patent royalties on the safe and effective jab, yes, and 6-foot distancing and masks. We're going to get into all that. There's lots of revelations coming out. In the end, the truth is always going to catch up with you. And in this case, the truth is catching up with a whole host of people, including Joe Biden and the millions of dollars he and his family and his son took from foreign governments. That's really set out pretty clearly in the Constitution. I'm summarizing, I'm paraphrasing, but aiding and abetting the enemy is like almost the top level of treason. But there's many other forms of treason too. And any attack on the Constitution and its amendments, the Bill of Rights, is treason. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Supreme Court, even the liberal judges and justices standing up for what is right under the Constitution over the last few weeks, including a couple of 9-zip decisions. That's good to see. But remember that institution, like all others in the country, are under attack by traitors. And if you think my language is harsh, why don't we just say it's not harsh enough? I'm keeping it civil for the purposes of this radio show and these video broadcasts. But inside, it is gut-wrenching. To see what happened to President Trump, I don't care whether you like President Trump, you don't like President Trump, you think he's the greatest guy, the best slice of cheese to ever hit the planet, or like a scourge, a scoundrel. It doesn't matter. What they did to him is treason. It's treason. And if they did it to him, they can do it to you. And I don't care what side of the ideological or political fence you're on. Depending upon who's in power, they will cut through the constitutional and the constitutional protections, which this government is supposed to be protecting, not undermining. And they will come for you, and they will get you, unless you start standing up now. One of the things we're going to do in this show, rather than the harbinger of doom and gloom and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to start giving you some concrete things you can do. Oh, the election's coming up, and we know what we need to do there, and I'm going to keep harping on it. You need to get people in who are original constitutionalists. You need to register to vote. You need to get your friends and family to register to vote. You need to vote and get them to vote. And that means voting early. If that means voting by mail, if that means volunteering as what you're doing as part of the election drive to legally harvest ballots that some of these states got through because of the treasonous shenanigans of many in power during the COVID conjure, in and of itself a treasonous act, then that's what you need to do. But there's some other things you can do too. The kind of, shall we say, thwart, to divert, to cast off, to avoid, and to stop this avalanche of anti-American treasonous activities that are coming from us, not only from within, but from forces outside. The WHO, we're going to talk about that pandemic treaty and how they illegally got some rules changed here in the last week at the last minute at midnight on a Saturday when nobody was looking. And the traitorous, shall we say, go along by the Biden administration and the folks that they have put in power at their various agencies, including Basiria at HHS. We are surrounded by people who hate and are attacking the Constitution, and thereby fighting and attacking you. Your finances, your private property, and we're going to be going there beginning again this week. Because, folks, here's what they want. They want you to be their tenant in your own house. They want you to be their serf on your own land. They want you to be broke so your hand is outstretched to their bread till, the CBDC, or whatever else they dream up to increase their control and authority. And it's up to us to say, no, we will not comply. And not only that, to take the steps to patch those holes in the hull of the great ship America, and to cast off those and hold them accountable. This is so key. None of this would be going on if these people had been held accountable years ago. One injustice, one attack on the Constitution, one treasonous act or lack of act builds on another when there is no accountability. And hopefully I'll give you some ideas beginning with this show on how you can hold them accountable and how they will eventually be held accountable if we exercise our rights, and we exercise them with vigor and resolution. So, we're going to have our rant story, of course, and we're going to have our founders' quotes. Then we're going to do the last of our treason series. We're going to get into the, shall we say, the uprising of the private property revisitation, because all sorts of things have come to light just in the last month or two, some of which I wasn't even aware, and I followed this stuff. You have no idea on how many tangents and how many levels their insidious tentacles of take, that is, take what is yours and make it theirs, and then rent it back to you. You have no idea what they're doing. And many times in concert with international agencies and foreign adversaries. The absolute definition of treason in the Constitution. So first of all, let's start off with our founders' quote, shall we? And we have two quotes this week. One is not by a founder, but he was one of the most famous philosophers, who eventually lost his life, by the way, due to treasonous activity by his countrymen. And this is Cato the Great, I quote, "I know not what treason is, if sapping and betraying the liberties of a people be not treason," unquote. Well, think about that one. And then we have George Washington. This was his farewell address. This is when he had turned down being king. This is when he had refused a third term as the first president of the United States and was headed back to his beloved Monticello, where he unfortunately died not too long thereafter. But this is a piece of his farewell speech which I think plays particularly well given the situation we find ourselves in, the foreign adversaries we face, and the domestic treason that we are contending with, particularly in concert with foreign adversaries. You know, millions of dollars to the Biden family from Romania and Russia and China and Ukraine and other places too. And Barack Obama came to office supposedly with a net worth of $700,000 and now has a net worth of somewhere between $65 and $100 million. How did that happen? And then Mitch McConnell, because, you know, the Uniparty has its Republican traitorous actors too. And Tony Fauci, tricky, fraudulent Tony Fauci, who testified in Congress in the hot seat this past week and was caught in lie after lie after lie after emails that they thought had been lost and deleted and expunged, kind of like Hillary did, were found. And they're black and white. I mean, they lay the whole thing out. And Bessaria at HHS, aiding and abetting the WHO in taking away national sovereignty from the United States, a treasonous act, and your rights and liberties contrary to the Constitution, a treasonous act. And then Merrick Garland, who fidgeted and squirmed under the hot lights of questioning in Congress this week, dodging and weaving. You know, as the head law enforcement officer of the United States, it would seem to me that probably he would be one of the very first we would want to hold accountable, don't you think? He who breaks the very laws that he is entrusted to protect for the benefit of the Constitution, America, and the American people. Boy, he's kind of right up there on the traitor list, don't you think? But we'll be going over all that. And we have great videos. I mean, really, a pile of videos. Fauci and COVID stuff and all the stuff that's come to light there. And Bessaria with the WHO and Merrick Garland on the grill in Congress and Tony Fauci's interview. They will be under the appropriate things. I'll bring them to your attention as we go through the show. But first of all, let's do our rant stories, shall we? And the rant story is really two-pronged this week. Yeah, it certainly is, unfortunately. One of them has to do with stupidity, mine. Yep, nobody else's, just mine. And the second has to do with, you know, when you do something and you screw it up, and then you do the same thing in the same way again, there's a bunch of things that you can say about taking that act the first time, but particularly taking the act the second. So our first rant story is, we told you about our neighbor whom we really like, they've had some problems with a bridge. They didn't really follow what we suggested they should do or something along those lines by some engineer or somebody more competent than us. And they went out and followed the edicts of a so-called expert. You know, we talked about that last week. Never trust an expert. Trust your own mind. Trust your common sense. Trust your experience. And basically their bridge got blown out by the creek, which is a pretty big creek, particularly when it's angry in the spring, in about a week, give or take. And we noticed just in the last day or two that they are busy doing the repairs to this bridge. And it looks like to me, and I hope I'm wrong, that they're doing exactly what they did before. So, you know, fool me once, shame on me, and fool me twice, I'll let you fill in the blank. Now, the second story is about yours truly, right? Rancher extraordinaire. Yes, sir. Resource expert, land specialist, ranch manager, wonderful. Well, you know, not always. Because we have these two reservoirs. One is really a big reservoir. I mean, there's a lot of water in it. And that acts as a storage reservoir for a lower reservoir, which is much smaller, and which feeds several ditches down below it and feeds all our pivot systems. The pivots, of course, are mechanized with siphons and pipes and all that kind of stuff, and the ditches are pretty much gravity flow. Well, we have head gates on these two ponds, and the head gates, of course, control the amount of water in and out of the ponds. And the head gate on the upper reservoir, the big one, that kind of acts as the storage for the little one, is, it's a 4-foot tube. I mean, it's huge. It carries a pile of water. And the head gate is this plate that comes down with a big crank across the tube to seal it off, open it up, or whatever. And you can imagine that over 4 feet, that plate moving that much is a pile of water. If you move that plate an inch, I guarantee you the force of that current would flat take you out. You would not be able to stand. That's how much water it is. And the ones down below are smaller, but still sizable, but smaller on the smaller pond, which feeds the ditches, feeds the pivot, etc. And you got to keep these in balance. Otherwise, your lower pond overflows, makes a mess. The ditches overflow. You're swimming around in canoes trying to go out in the field just about. The pivot tracks fill in. You have to shut down the pivot because it gets too muddy. I can go on and on and on. And on the upper pond, our spillway works great, the emergency spillway. But, at a certain point in time, even though that is a monstrous dam and solidly built, and it's been there for now, I think that was one of the first we put in 20 years plus, and has worked beautifully in all sorts of huge events, there can come a time when a whole bunch of water comes at one time, and if you're not ready for it, you can have a real wreck. Well, we take turns going up to check these ponds. We check them in the morning, we check them in the evening, and we check them even more often than that when the water's really going, like late April and early May. And it was my turn last night, in fact, to go out there and check the ponds. And we try and combine, because it's a pretty good trek out there in the ATV, and then it's a nice hike, beautiful. And last night I was out there, the sun was unbelievable. Dusk is my favorite time of day. I mean, the light was diffused across the water. It had that special tinge of gold and orange that you see as the sun is setting. And the leaves, newly sprouted on the trees, were kind of fluttering in the light, making their soft little whispers. The currents brushed against them. And I don't know, I must have gotten lost in the moment, because I adjusted that head gate on that upper pond just a bit. I'm talking about a quarter of a turn. There's 14 clicks in a turn. I adjusted it 3. And I thought that I had closed it. Less water going to the lower pond. Because in going by the lower pond, I noticed that it was a little higher than normal. Not too high yet, but on its way. So less water going into it is what I wanted. And I went down and checked the lower pond, and everything seemed to be fine. I made a few adjustments down there into the ditches below the lower reservoir, and everything was copacetic. Well, this morning, my ranch lieutenant, who's terrific, he comes roaring up to the house about 7:30 and goes, "Man, you see all the water out in the pivot field?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "What did you do to the ponds last night?" I said, "Well, I closed off the upper pond a quarter of a turn, and, kind of closed down the lower pond just a little bit because there'd be less water coming down to keep the flows constant to the ditches and the pivots. And what's the problem?" He goes, "There's water everywhere. The lower reservoir is overflowing at the culvert. It's overflowing at the pivots. It's overflowing at the emergency ditch." And the upper pond, the upper pond is gushing water. It's too low. So I guess what I did, folks, was I opened the upper pond rather than closed it. You know, I forgot the righty-tighty, lefty-loosey rule, or I don't know, I was in a daydream watching a beautiful dusk descend on the Rocky Mountains. I have no idea. But it all comes down to me. And the moral of this story is no matter how many times you've done something and done it right, and no matter how many times you have patted yourself on the back for doing it just perfectly, the right little adjustment. And we're talking about, 25 years of doing this, give or take. You can make a mistake. And that's why it's always good to take a moment and check your work. No matter how many times you've done it, no matter how sure you are that you know exactly what you're doing because you are, the creator's gift to ranch lands or whatever. Because invariably, at some point, you will open rather than close rather than open, or make some other really stupid mistake with, in this case, it wasn't disastrous, but it could have been. So that's the moral of this week's Rant Stories. And now let's get into our last, until we have to revisit it again, given what's going on out there, our last component of our Treason series, and our first component, or revisited component, of our You Will Own Nothing, and You Will Be Happy. Their theft of your private property series, because that's what they're trying to do, folks. They want you to be their tenant in your own house, their serf on your own land. And they want to own everything, and they want to make sure you own nothing. And everything you see going on in the economy right now, and everything you see going on with international agencies, the WHO, the UN, we're going to be getting into that. Everything you see going on with the Federal Reserve and interest rates and inflation, and the purposeful engineered demise of the dollar is intentional. None of this is an accident. They mean this to happen. And they have an end result that they think is good for them, and that I can assure you, if they accomplish their mission, will be bad for you and I. Treason basically includes acts such as participating in a war against one's native country, attempting to overthrow its government, in the case of the United States, not the government, but the Constitution, spying on its military, conducting espionage, sabotage, all those types of acts. The Constitution. What exactly does the Constitution say about treason? Well, Article 3, Section 3 reads as follows. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court, which may explain why all these people on the witness stand under oath in Congress are dancing around the obvious, like Fauci saying, "Oh, I didn't know anything about those emails." No. And Garland saying, "Oh, how dare you attack the integrity of the DOJ?" Yes. Because remember, admission is one of the things that's required to prove treason under the Constitution. The Congress shall have the power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted. In other words, you can't carry it beyond XYZ's life, into his family, etc. The accused stands alone, so to speak. And this was later solidified in federal statute, because obviously the Constitution was purposely vague in how it was written, because the forefathers were brilliant, gave us enough rope to kind of hang ourselves or get ourselves out of the boondoggle, one or the other. 18 USC 2381, to be exact, says, whoever owing allegiance to the United States levies war against them or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason and shall suffer death, or shall be imprisoned not less than 5 years and fined under this title, but not less than $10,000, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. The government expounded on this. There were several other federal statutes passed. The sedition statute in 1798, sedition and Alien and Sedition Acts, to be exact. The Espionage and Sedition Act and the Espionage Act of 1917. These do not require the testimony of 2 witnesses. Kind of interesting. Nor do they require admission in open court. Also quite interesting. What's really interesting, and this is going to get into our discussion on what we can do to hold people accountable, which means to end this treasonous parade, this continual poking of the bear of freedom by those that hate freedom and love control. Keep all this in mind. Keep in mind the fact that every state, virtually every state, has its own treason laws. They correspond, for the most part, very closely to the treason laws and the edicts in the Constitution, state constitution, federal constitution, as to our Constitution for the United States. And the AGs in those states, and the DAs in those states, and the county attorneys in those states have every right and every power to bring those actions where it impacts the citizens or the state in which they hold office. Obviously, there are many things out there that impact every state. Immigration, right? Breach of the Constitution at the border is a breach of every state constitution. I mean, Texas is kind of playing that hand right now down on the border. The propagation of false information, censorship, election fraud. There's states playing those hands right now. Missouri versus Biden, for one, which, by the way, happens to be going very well for the states, not so well for the federal government. This was the collusion of the federal government with big tech and social media to hide Hunter's laptop and a host of other things. I mean, you know the list. It's treason. I mean, it's just straight out treason. There's been some really interesting treason cases in the United States and elsewhere over the last 150, give or take, years. Going back a little bit further than that, in the American Revolution, there was a slave by the name of Billy. He was accused of treason by the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. He was pardoned by Thomas Jefferson, based on the fact that as a slave, he was not a citizen. Therefore, if he wasn't a citizen, he couldn't commit treason. Pretty interesting. Going back to World War II, kind of fitting on this, I want to give a shout out to the men and women who fought at D-Day for us. 80 years ago, June 6th, just a day or two ago. I had a whole little salute to them in last week's show. If you didn't listen to it or see it, please do. But in World War II, there was a guy by the name of William Joyce. He was nicknamed Lord Haw Haw, of course. And he was broadcasting Nazi propaganda from Germany across the English Channel to the Allies, England, and the U.S. troops over there. Joyce was arrested for treason by the British. His defense team said he was an American citizen and a naturalized German. Therefore, he could not have committed treason against Great Britain. However, what killed him, literally, was that he had a British passport, and he had lied to get that passport. And that British passport gave Britain jurisdiction over him, and he was convicted of treason. He was hung, by the way. I think the exact words are from the neck until dead. Napoleon, we'll go back a little bit further even, because all this is foundation for where we're headed. The rest of the story, you might say. So Marshal Michel Ney, right? He was one of Napoleon's top generals. When Napoleon kind of lost his first round with the French monarchy, he was banished. And Ney went into the French army and pledged allegiance to France. Well, when Napoleon came back, Ney said, bye-bye, France, hello, Napoleon. And then, of course, when Napoleon was trounced and bounced for the second time, he got off scot-free, but Ney was arrested and tried for treason. What's kind of interesting in this trial is a little historical tidbit, was that his attorney, who was brilliant, argued that he was really born in Prussia. Therefore, he really wasn't a French citizen. Therefore, they really couldn't bring a treason claim against him. Unfortunately for the attorney, and really unfortunately for Marshal Ney, Ney was a proud Frenchman at heart, and he blurted out during the trial while his attorney was arguing that he was at heart a Frenchman and always a Frenchman, which, of course, he was duly convicted and hung. Let's go to the states, because this is really the rest of the story. This ties in right into where we're going with what you can do, okay, and what you can get others in your state to do. So most states have provisions, as we discussed, in their constitutions, just like the U.S. Constitution, and in their laws. You can commit treason against any state. As some examples, Thomas Dorr, D-O-R-R, he was convicted for treason against the state of Rhode Island for what was known as the Dorr Rebellion. This is right after the Revolutionary War, but he was later pardoned. John Brown, you know that name, right? Leading up to the Civil War. He was convicted of treason against the Commonwealth of Virginia. Remember, Virginia was a slave state, and he was an abolitionist. And he was convicted for treason for his role in the 1859 raid on Harper's Ferry, if you kind of dig back into your Civil War history book. He was hanged, hung by the neck until dead. The Mormon prophet, Joseph Smith, many of you are familiar with him or have heard of him. He was charged with treason against Missouri. And this was during the time of the Exodus, the Mormons fleeing west, many to the Utah territories at that time. In fact, I talk about it in my Threads West books. He was charged with treason with 5 others and originally tried in front of a military tribunal, Missouri Militia Tribunal. But he escaped. They caught him again. They tried him in civil court, and he escaped again. What's really interesting is that Illinois finally caught him. And Illinois transferred his case to a civilian court again. And while he was awaiting trial there on treason and other charges, he was killed by a lynch mob. So, in the end, he got hung also. So I'm just giving you a few examples. You know, you have the example of the Rosenberg couple that was arrested. This was on the federal level and tried for treason and insurrection and espionage and convicted, not on treason, but on espionage and insurrection. My point is that the crimes that are being committed by the Biden administration, Obama third term, by Obama when he was in office, if he was even legitimately in office, that's a whole nother question and one of treason. The edicts, crimes, and mandates of Biden's appointees, which we're going to get into here in just a moment as examples. These are all crimes under the United States Code They're treason under the United States Constitution, and they are treason and crimes under most states' constitutions. Now, we've seen what's going on with Trump. Okay, once again, like him, hate him, doesn't matter. What's happening is transparent. It is insidious. It is a twisting of the law. It is a contravention of the United States Constitution. And in my opinion, every single one of these cases is treason. And the only way you could get out of saying it was treason is if Joe Biden was also being prosecuted under the documents case. If Joe Biden and others in his administration were also being prosecuted in the election interference, whatever they got going there in New York, he got convicted on case. Everything here is rigged, exactly as he says, and that is unconstitutional. The equal application of law and the application of law, not feelings, not emotions, not ideology, is mandated by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the other amendments to the Constitution. Purposely contravening the Bill of Rights, the other amendments in the Constitution, is treason. There's no two ways around it. It may also run afoul of other statutes. I'm not talking about those right now, although they would certainly come into play. But one of the things I think we need to do, and by we, I'm not talking about Republicans. I'm talking about conservatives, and I'm talking about populist nationalists who love the Constitution and the country and are trying to save the country and uphold the Constitution. We need to get on our people, our attorney generals, our DAs. Alvin Bragg is a DA in New York. I mean, he's not even a state prosecutor. And we need to bring the wrath of justice against these people. I don't care how many trials it takes. I don't care how many places the trials or the charges are brought, because they have to be held accountable. And, you know, lawfare is good for one, lawfare is good for all. And I have a feeling that if you take this tact, lawfare as a political instrument will pretty much disappear from the United States pretty quickly. And the people who are bringing these claims, the judges who are presiding over these fake trials, I mean, it's so transparent. They need to be held accountable because they are committing treason, in addition to the violation of who knows what state and umpty-ump federal statutes. Okay, we need to have our day. And we need to stop being squeamish. And we need to stop going, oh, you know, we need to play by the rules. And we can play by the rules. These are the rules. So let's play by them. What did Barack Obama say? Never bring a knife to a gunfight. You know, that's awfully good advice from Barry. So that's one thing that we can do. And I'm going to talk to you in just a moment about how we can try and implement that. But in the meantime, let me give you some other examples of treason. This, folks, is like, I'm not even going back 3 years. I'm just going over the last month or two. How's that? I mean, this is in your face. This is the tip of the iceberg. I'm not even denting it. How about this? In the nonsense trial that was just concluded in New York, did you know that the prosecutor who really prosecuted the case was a guy by the name of Colangelo? Yeah, have you heard of him? Well, Colangelo worked for Letitia James. That's right, the Attorney General of New York, who's bringing this other case against Trump, right? That's the case where Judge Erdogan has decided that things that are worth $200 million are only worth $18 million, and therefore there was fraud with no victim, no crime, and everybody saying they got paid and made all their money and blah, blah, blah. Well, he worked for Letitia James. And that went so well, he got kind of drafted, right? He went upfield into the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. And in the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., he was like the number 3 guy in the Justice Department. And the number 3 guy in the Justice Department of the United States came back to New York. Yeah, I bet you don't know this. And he worked with Alvin Bragg in the New York District Attorney's Office, and he was the prosecutor, the chief prosecutor, the guys with the hands on the steering wheel in the recently concluded Trump trial. Let's flash forward a few weeks, or flash back. And last week, Merrick Garland is testifying in Congress. And by the way, all these videos, his testimony, Tony Fauci's testimony, the whole 9 yards, is up on the website under treason. Gee, I wonder why. Corruption, under the audio bar and under rat-a-tat-tat. You should really listen to them. They're eye-openers. And Merrick Garland spent all his time whining about the fact that he was being attacked and the DOJ, the integrity of the DOJ was being, I mean, he used that defense as a way to get out of answering questions all the way along. He never answered the question if there were any communications between Colangelo and the Justice Department. I mean, obviously there were, right? Or if there was any collusion between the Justice Department and the New York City's District Attorney's Office or any other quote-unquote Trump prosecutorial office. I mean, we all know what the real answer is to this. We all know what the emails would show. He sat there and told the congressman that he wasn't going to give them the report by the special prosecutor. Remember, who works for the people of the United States and is paid by the people of the United States, as is Garland and the rest of these people. He wasn't going to give Congress the report from the special prosecutor's investigation on the document case when he interviewed Joe Biden. Remember, Trump's being prosecuted for documents that he declassified while he was president. Biden is not being prosecuted for documents that he and Hunter had next to the Corvette in the garage that he took as a senator and a vice president, neither one of whom have the ability to declassify anything. In that Trump trial, here's another one that will kind of get your mental corkscrew twisting. That judge, Merchan, the guy from Columbia, he was the chief judge of New York, chief judge of the New York City bench. The chief judge says he was just appointed at random, which, by the way, is what the law requires. But that he thought, he was competent enough to handle the case. Well, this same chief judge also appointed this same judge, Merchan, to the high-profile case against Steve Bannon. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Trump's inner circle. And this same judge appointed this same judge, Merchan, this same chief judge, who presided over the trials of Trump's business associates. In the case of one poor guy, Weinshank or something like that, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. That poor guy was convicted, got out of jail, and they went after him again. And in the second trial, Merchan was his judge. And guess what? He lost the trial. Oh, who would have thought? This is rotten to the core. It's unconstitutional and it's treasonous. And somebody needs to take a look at the chief judge of New York City, too, not just Merchan. As to Merchan, it is clear in the code of ethics, the judicial code of ethics, that if you have a conflict of interest you need to recuse yourself. And I don't mean a conflict of interest day to day, or you don't like somebody. One would hope if you're a judge, you can rise above that. I mean, many judges can't, but you would hope that they could. But when you contribute significant sums to Democratic candidates, including Joe Biden, Trump's, rival here in the middle of an election campaign, and you have a daughter who's raised 90 to 100 million for Democratic causes, and according to reports I've read, I don't have any backup for this, been paid $9 million in fees for that fundraising, I think you have a conflict of interest. And of course, the daughter is out fundraising on dad's handling of this trial, bringing in more money for the Democrats and more fees for the Merchan family. This is all, as we all know, highly corrupt, highly illegal, and in my opinion, treason. And these people need to be held accountable. You probably now, you're aware of the immigration thing on the southern border. Allowing that invasion of the country is treason. It's not just, trying to get votes. It's not just trying to accomplish the displacement of white people by brown people and all the other things they're trying to do. It's not just trying to, as Barry would say, this is his third term, fundamentally change the United States of America. This is treason. Number one, you have foreign nationals coming in from China, Iran. These are hostile countries that we are in an undeclared state of war with, which seems to meet all the requirements of both state constitutions and the American Constitution, aid and comfort to the enemy. When you allow the enemy to inject tens and hundreds of thousands of fighting-age young men without vetting, without tracking, without purpose into the United States, using taxpayer money, I might add, taxpayer money, I would say that that is aiding and abetting the enemies of the United States. And every state that's affected has a claim, because I'm sure it's in breach of their Constitution, as Texas has discovered it is in breach of theirs, and certainly in breach of the United States Constitution. And the guy who did all this bidding, well, I'm not sure he didn't run it, is Mayorkas, who I've brought you in previous shows, go back into the archives, this is 2-3 years ago, before he was ever appointed as director of DHS. I warned you about this guy. He has big ties to communist China. Big ties, not little ones, big ties to communist China. Mayorkas is aiding and abetting the enemies of the United States. Never mind breaking immigration law. Never mind breaching the immigration clauses of the United States. I can go on down the list. These people need to be held accountable. They're not going to be held accountable by a treasonous Merrick Garland and a traitorous Department of Justice, unfortunately, right now. So they need to be held accountable by us. And us is the states and the counties and the cities. It all comes down to local rule. That's really what America was founded on. The federal government was never supposed to be the almost 5 million person employee, largest in the world, employer, largest in the world, that it is. That's a topic for another day. But all these people, the WHO pandemic treaty, which is a death knell. I mean, this is really, really, really a killer for your personal freedoms, liberties, health, welfare, and safety, and health freedoms. They've been trying to get this pandemic treaty passed forever. In contravention of the United States, the Biden administration and the Obama administration, Trump told the WHO to shove it, are trying to get it approved without ratification by Congress, even though the Constitution of the United States specifically calls for ratification of any foreign treaty, and the WHO is certainly not a domestic organization, by the Senate of the United States. You know what? That's a breach of the Constitution, and it's treason. Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. And I'm sure there are attorneys out there who would agree with me, even though I'm just a hayseed layman in Wyoming. And I'm sure there's attorneys out there and AGs and DAs and county attorneys who would agree with me on the claims they might be able to bring on behalf of the citizens of their state or their area, if it's a local area, and therefore really on behalf of the citizens of the United States against these various perpetrators of treason. We have the laws, and they're actually valid laws, unlike the, no pun intended, trumped up nonsense they're trying to conjure off the pages of the statutes with tortured explanation and twisting in his cases. This is not a tit for tat. This is not a quid pro quo. This is justice. This is the Constitution. This is accountability. And this is stamping out treason and corruption once and for all in the United States so that we can continue to survive as a representative republic ruled by the Constitution, which is the foundation of all law in the United States. In good news, let me give you a little good news. The Supreme Court is standing up for the Constitution. It's been admirable in that respect. And I got to hand it, I'm not a fan of the three liberal justices. And they come up with some wild stuff. But they have been pretty good in upholding clear-cut cases of constitutional violation. In fact, in the last week, the Supreme Court voted 9-0. That's right, unanimously. And the opinion was written by none other than Justice Sotomayor, who is certainly not conservative. And this had to do with a case that involved the National Rifle Association. And the state of New York, the state of New York is really out of control, aren't they? State of New York, state of California, state of blue states, folks. I don't know why you continue to live there. It's beyond me. But the blue states are out of control, and New York was threatening the lending institutions, banks, money exchanger services like Square, and the insurance companies that insured the NRA and NRA members, saying, if you don't stop doing business with the NRA and its members, we're going to prosecute you. We're going to sue you. We're going to shut you down in New York. This is really like an advent of Eric Holder, Barry Obama's wingman, with his Operation Choke Point, shutting down financing and banking and all sorts of financial and insurance arrangements for gun manufacturers and gun dealers, and shipping 2,000 unidentified weapons across the Mexican border, which has resulted in thousands upon thousands of deaths. But you got to understand, progressive communists don't care about death. That's just a collateral damage to them. The means justifies the end. Okay? That's Saul Alinsky's Rule for Radicals. You can get a copy of it on our website. Know your enemy. The Rules for Radicals. They follow it to the T. You can even see it in the pathetic hearings of Garland and Fauci. Speaking of treason, how about Fauci? So we have these congressional hearings. Once again, the whole interview, the whole under oath congressional grilling is on the website. Fauci sits there and tries to deny emails in black and white to him or from him exist or say what they say, which they say in very plain English. He tried to tell the investigators the other day that he didn't know anything about the destruction of evidence, documents, or emails, even though he's on the emails corresponding with his 20-year associate at the NIH. I believe his name is Steve Boren. And Steve Borman is writing him emails saying, oh, I learned from our FOIA officer how to delete emails so they couldn't find them in FOIA requests. I think we're safe. I mean, you really have to watch these videos. I mean, I couldn't make all this. You just couldn't make all this stuff up. And Fauci admits that his 6-foot distancing thing was out of thin air, that there was no science for the mass, that the jabs didn't stop COVID or transmission of COVID. Folks, you remember what these people were saying. His associate and partner in crime, Dr. Birx, Scarf Lady, she came out after the hearing and said, yes, yeah, we did try and conceal the fact that it came from Wuhan and that we were funding gain of function using U.S. taxpayers' money and a whole bunch of other things. I mean, in any other universe, Anthony Fauci would be tried, he would be picked up and he would be prosecuted for treason, corruption, and fraud. And when that trial was done, he'd be prosecuted in Nuremberg 2.0 for crimes against humanity. This man and his cabal cost America and the world tens of millions of lives by withholding proper treatments and lying about them for COVID, ivermectin, all of which now the CDC is great. Go out and get your ivermectin. You remember all the nonsense, the horse-paced crap from the complicit mainstream media, who, by the way, are also complicit in the fraud and the treason. You remember Fauci saying, maintain 6 feet of separation. You saw the videos of him not doing any of this stuff, or the other elites not doing any of this stuff. Do you think Fauci really got any one of those injections, folks? Do you really think so? Come on. Do you think that the camera shots of President Cadaver getting the shot, and Vice President Kamala Harris getting the shot, do you think they really got a shot? They got a bunch of salt water. Come on. They knew what was in those jabs. They knew they hadn't been tested. That's why they were emergency use authorization. EUAs. They've never been approved, ever. AstraZeneca, it was AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Pfizer. AstraZeneca just pulled theirs off the market and admitted that, well, in very rare conditions, you could have like a lot of problems or you could die from our injection. Where was all that 3 years ago from Fauci and Birx and Collins at the CDC? This is treason and corruption. These people must be held accountable. And Fauci and that crew, they committed those crimes across state lines in every single state in this union. Their lies, their fraud, their causations of death, maiming, lifelong disability, families rendered asunder, occurred in every state. And you tell me that there isn't one AG out there that doesn't have the cojones to bring these people to justice, because Merrick Garland sure as hell isn't. And the statute of limitations is ticking, which is another game they play. They pretend that they're going to investigate, They pretend that they may prosecute depending upon what their investigation says. And then, we couldn't get it all done, and the statute of limitations is run, and now we can't prosecute. Oh, how convenient. This is just a sampling. Just a sampling, which all ties into this thought on treason and corruption and accountability and what we can do about it. So let me tell you, one of the things we have on the website, on the rightsideradio.com, is a take action page. It's kind of outdated. Over the next week or two, we're going to clean this up. We're going to have people that we think you should contribute to. There's many multiple contribution opportunities out there. I mean, literally, you can put in $10 and between all the other donors and the multiplication that they use, it's $200 or $2,000. I mean, I've seen some for 8,000x this year. You put in $10 and you contributed $80,000 to a campaign. That's a lot of bang for your buck. We're going to have those types of things posted on the Take Action page. And we're also going to have, we're going to start this week, what you can do. Not only to give money, we're going to have the organizations you can give money to. Judicial Watch, which is, they're doing a yeoman's job of trying to protect election integrity. They've identified over 4 million people in various states that shouldn't be on the voter rolls. They don't live there anymore. They're illegal. They're not U.S. citizens. They moved away. They're dead. You name it. And they're forcing these states to clean this up. 4 million. How many of those people do you think voted in 2020 and 22? 3,999,000? Probably. But one of the things you guys can do, and this is really important, okay? Because this is really a team effort, right? Team America. This is a undertaking that must be pursued by all of us, shoulder to shoulder. Get together with some other people in your neighborhood. Get together with your community group, with your church group. It doesn't matter. It only takes 2 or 3 or 4 of you to brainstorm this stuff. Come up with some standard letters. They don't have to be long. They can be a paragraph or 2. Remember that if you send a letter or you communicate with your congressman, so few people do that most congressional offices look at a communication from a constituent as the equivalent of 5,000 constituents communicating with them. In the case of a senatorial office, the United States Senator, it's 75,000. Now, do you think you could write 100 letters so they think, I mean, basically that's the equivalent in their mind of 750,000 of their constituents writing them about a topic or a subject or a course of action? You have to get involved at the local level, folks. I've been saying this for years. You've heard it elsewhere. I mean, it's nothing new, but do it. The local level is your first line of defense against the federal level. And listen, some local levels are out of control depending upon what state you happen to be in right now, unfortunately, and listening to me. Other states are pretty solid, and other states are solid and could be more solid. So your first line of defense is your city council. Your first line of defense is your school board. Remember, we're fighting the rear guard action. We're trying to keep this country alive and the Constitution functioning and viable until a new generation who's younger than us can come up and take the reins and guide this republic to where it was meant to go by the founders. You can't do that if you don't control education, folks. And I have some rat-a-tat-tat coming up. Well, you'll see. That's all I can tell you. Research your city council. Research your state legislators. Research your sheriff, although most of the sheriffs are good. There's always an exception. Research your county commissioners. Research your governor. It doesn't take long. I mean, if you spend an hour or 2 on this, you'd be pretty familiar with the various people at the state level and the county level. Make sure that these people are true conservatives or populist nationalists, members of the local Freedom Caucus, wherever you happen to be. Rhinos aren't going to do you any good, folks. In fact, they do more harm maybe than the Democrats. I'm not really sure. Members of the Uniparty aren't going to do you any good. In fact, they're going to throw you under the bus. They've been throwing you under the bus for decades. It's time we awaken. Do a little round table in your group, whether it's 2 people or 10 people or whatever, and come up with the key topics the key things that you want to know where these people stand, okay? It might be immigration, it might be local taxes, it could be whatever you come up with. This is a representative republic, you get to choose. And find out where each and every candidate stands. And by the way, don't just take their word for it. Hopefully they have a voting record. Check their voting record. Because, you know, at the national level, you can find all sorts of rhino Republicans and progressive communist Democrats who say one thing and do exactly the opposite. You know, Biden right now, really Obama, sensing that the country is up in arms over their breach of the Constitution via this illegal invasion at our southern border, he's now coming up with an executive order. Remember, it was just 6 months ago he said he couldn't do an executive order. It was just 2 years before that he did executive orders rescinding all Trump's executive orders on the border. I mean, these people are just, it's insulting how stupid they think we are. It's insulting how dim a memory they must believe we have. It's, well, don't get me foaming at the mouth here. But get these people on the record and check their record. See how they actually voted, particularly if it's an existing legislature, an existing councilman. I mean, a new person, obviously they don't have a voting record, but you can find out enough about them to find out what they really believe. Whether they are a rhino in conservative clothing or a communist in rhino clothing, there's plenty of them out there too, or a true conservative or populist nationalist, which is what I would define, by the way, Steve Bannon as. And invite these people to a roundtable. I mean, this wouldn't be hard. You could do it at your local library. There's plenty of public places. I mean, you can get this done and have it hospitable and nice and organized. And you can ask these people each 5 questions or 6 questions or whatever you guys come up with. Do you think the southern border should be shut down? Do you think illegal aliens should be deported? Do you think we should pay for Social Security, healthcare, et cetera, for illegal aliens? There's your immigration questions. I mean, I'm making it very simple. Do you think we should be involved in the Ukraine war, in the Israeli war, in the potential conflict over there in Taiwan or in Niger? Do you think American dollars should be going to Ukraine or American arms should be going to Ukraine? You can go right down this list, folks. You can ask them about local topics. What do you think of property taxes? You know, what do you think of school funding? What do you think of the state budget? I mean, come up with your questions, do your roundtable, and make a good choice at the voting booth. Or the way things are going right now with what the Democrats have done to undermine our election process with your early voting or your mail-in ballot. I personally recommend early voting, bring it in person. That's my personal recommendation, but get your ballot in one way or the other before Election Day. You saw what happened in Arizona, right? With the machines not working and, yeah, right. No, nothing to see here. This was all just a coincidence in 73 Republican precincts, folks. On Election Day, after the machines were tabulated and approved and blessed and whatever. Okay. Talk to these people about accountability. And remember, your local government, your state government particularly, because the states have all sorts of powers under the United States Constitution. Remember, any powers not enumerated herein are reserved for the states, right out of the Constitution. And that's an awful lot of powers. Because the Constitution is, just as Barry Obama correctly said, and he hates it, it's a covenant of negative rights. The Constitution is a restriction on the power of the federal government, on the rights of the federal government. It's a covenant of negative rights when it comes to government. Obama hates it. That's why he has for 3 terms, and he's hoping for a 4th, railed and fought against it at every single turn, undermining it in any way, shape, or form he can, using any means he can, legal, illegal, or treasonous. Contribute to these people. When you decide you like a candidate and they're the real deal, contribute to them. You may not be able to afford much. Maybe it's $5. Or if you're better off, $25. Or if you're doing well, $100 or whatever. A little bit of money in a local race goes a long ways. Unless, of course, you're competing against Soros trying to elect a DA. And contribute to the other people we have up or will have up on the Take Action page. True the Vote. Great outfit. Judicialwatch.org. Phenomenal outfit. Gun Owners of America. I mean, there's several organizations in various realms of what you believe in your heart to be so, and what the Constitution guarantees, who will do a fabulous job if they have the funding. Give them that funding. I mean, what are you going to do? Send the money to the Justice Department and hope that you get justice? Really? I just don't think that's going to work out well. Write your little group. Come together with letters. You can change it a little bit. They don't have to be long. In fact, they shouldn't be long. Write your local DA. Write your county attorney. Write your state attorney general. And write your governor and say, look, we want Mayorkas tried under the laws of this state for treason, for sedition, and for the breach of any statutes which can rightfully be attributed to his acts and lack of acts, because of the border. There's no way you don't have illegal aliens in your state using public resources and endangering the public welfare. There's no way. Every state is affected. How about election interference? How about election interference? Think about all the people your AGs could go after on that. They don't have to fight the 2020 fight. They don't have to fight the 2022 fight. But they can fight the 24 fight before the voting begins. I told you that the Republican National Committee is suing 200 various jurisdictions around the United States to tamp down the mail-in balloting, condense the time for counting the votes, condense the time for taking ballots, etc., etc. Good for them. It's about time. Should have done that prior to 2020. I mean, we knew what was coming. Get your local agencies to prosecute those who perpetrated the COVID fraud on every single level. And on a personal note, if you know somebody, or you are somebody, or you have somebody in your family, or or immediate circle, and you have a claim, you were injured by a mandate. You were injured because you believe the fraud of Tony Fauci and his cohorts. You were injured in any way, shape, or form. You have a claim. And there's a pile of attorneys out there pursuing these claims right now, and they're doing very well. Pursue that claim. Not only can you get paid for your time and effort, and you probably deserve it, given what you've gone through, but it's accountability, folks. You can't let Pfizer and Moderna and Fauci and Collins and Birx and the rest of this scumbag crew get away with what they've done. You just can't do it. You have to have a legitimate claim, but if you do, bring it. There are attorneys who will represent you on a contingency basis. It will cost you nothing other than your time. And I don't know, would you rather watch the football game? Really? When you put together your letters for the legislature and the AG, you should have a set of letters which ask them to invoke strict laws. There are a number of states passing strict laws which would not allow the federal government to exercise any domain over the infringement of the Second Amendment, which would not recognize any mandates, health mandates by the federal government. This is particularly important in terms of what's happening with the WHO pandemic treaty and the rules that we're going to get into in the rat-a-tat-tat, that they just illegally passed. Great article by Robert Malone. It's on the website. And listen, folks, if there's nobody good running for the school board, if there's nobody good running for the council, if there's nobody good running for your local state legislature's office, get out of the chair. Get in the saddle. Buckle that cinch and go for it. That's what this is all about. Nobody else is going to do this for you. It's up to us. There's some other things we can do too. Research in your state. There's a federal statute and there are state statutes. Citizen grand juries. Now, your AG, people who are prosecutors at the local, state, county level, they can convene grand juries. But did you know that in many states, citizens can convene grand juries? I suggest you get an attorney who will work with you. I think that's important. And you can actually convene a grand jury, and you can actually bring claims, depending upon the state, depending upon the claim. You got to do the research, but you can bring a claim, Jane Doe, ex-rel, Attorney General of the United States versus Fauci, versus Collins, versus Becerra, versus Mayorkas, versus Biden. You can bring those claims. There's another thing we'll talk about next week called the qui tam process. False Claims Act of 1863. Very interesting. And that would be a way for the taxpayers not to pay whatever fines might be levied on these scoundrels, these treasonous scoundrels, when it comes time for adjudication of your claims, or the claims of your AG, or the claims of your DA. Otherwise, they don't care. They're just paying you with your money. It's your tax money. It has to be personal to these people. Personal, if you're going to hold them accountable. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in this show is that you need to get informed and you need to stay informed. It doesn't take a lot of time. You can listen to this show, or you can listen to other shows like it. I mean, 1 or 2 a week, 2 or 3 a week if you really like it. And you will be better informed, unfortunately, than the large percentage of Americans. And being informed is key to informed voting. And informed voting is a key to getting the right people in. And getting the right people in is a key to a whole bunch of things. Now, maybe you think abortion is like the number one topic. Good for you. I don't disagree with you. But if you don't get the right people in, folks, arguing about abortion at this stage and losing the election is going to get you nothing, including what you want to see happen on abortion. Be smart. Be smart like the other side. Get in a position of power, and then you can get enacted the types of things you want to see, the protections for life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, etc. If you don't control the levers of power, you will get nothing enacted. You will simply be beat over the head with the club of unequal justice forever until you are their serf, until you are their tenant. Let's talk about private property. This is really important. Next week, I'm going to talk about private property in terms of farms, ranches, food, agricultural acreages, all that kind of thing. There is, you can't believe the nonsense rolling down like puke from Washington, D.C. and the federal agencies at landowners right now. I mean, I have papers here. See that? All that stuff? There's scores, maybe hundreds of articles of what these treasonous folks are doing to undermine your private property rights on a land basis throughout the United States, particularly in the West, particularly in red states. I mean, they want you first, folks. They already got the blue states because, you know, most of the people in the blue states who do not think like us are, as Lenin would call them, useful idiots. They'll probably turn over the keys to their house or the keys to the gate to their land. Who knows what they'll do, if anything. So we're going to talk about that next week. But this week, I want to focus on your house. That's right, your personal property and private property in terms of what's really nearest and dearest to you. Your house and all the things that go along with it. The safety, the shelter, the storage, the family, the whole 9 yards. Because they're after it. And everything that they've done, literally since the days of Jimmy Carter, as I'm going to explain, has been geared to with increasing ferocity and increasing focus as they see the plan come into fruition. Taking what you have and making it theirs. And that includes your house.